South Congress is unanimously approved through the City Council on the first readings, both times. There's a tenant there who's been there for 60 years selling used auto parts with a 60-year-old facility, and I think they liked what we had to offer, walkability and connectivity to parks and trails. So it had a lot of exciting things about it, but we had to relocate the existing tenant who had a lease on it for another 12 years. We found a place to put it, which is an old landfill that's 50 years old, closed since 1982. And normally these types of uses will go back into some form of use after that amount of time, given adequate post-closure care. In our case, we found something that didn't have adequate post-closure care, but it was ripe for attention. The tenant on South Congress was amenable to leaving, and so we thought, we've got a deal. As we started to dig deeper into the landfill, we started to realize that the record keeping wasn't really accurate. The investments that were said to have been made were not made. The general appetite for dealing with it was smaller than you would expect from an environmental steward. And then we kind of became the bad guy because we're talking about this problem.
So the county ran this landfill 42 years that this has been just land that has been sitting.
Yep, it's been sitting, and they're supposed to sit for a while, but they're supposed to sit, and essentially you commit to not letting water get in it and not letting water get out of it. And those things are not happening, then you get issued a violation from the state.
Yeah, we actually toured it. It's not a pleasant place. I don't know, what's the measurable toxins that are in the? Have y'all done a measurement on that?
The experts came out, and our samples taken showed that it was 7.5 times the allowable level of lead, 4 or 5 times the amount of arsenic, and then other heavy metals. So stuff you don't really want. And the thing is that it goes into Walnut Creek, and that's kind of the forgotten watershed. And so we see ourselves as, we've got this project in South Congress. Everyone likes it. Let's use that as an opportunity to do something good elsewhere. And I think we found a win-win because the property taxes created at South Congress, we did the math on it. That's actually enough to do a full-scale remediation on the landfill.
Legally, they're required to accept the responsibility of this. Why isn't this being enforced?
I point to that 1976 letter from the Precinct 1 commissioner. He said that he couldn't get consensus to do what needed to be done at the landfill. And what's implied, in my opinion, is that there's only so many resources. And the commissioners didn't want resources going to this Precinct 1 when it could be going elsewhere.
I just offer a couple of thoughts. One, I think every time Travis County has not had to move forward, they have saved money. So I would say saving money would be just one of the things, and as long as they can put it off, they keep putting it off. I have been amazed to see the lack of interest in trying to make this creative project happen. And, on the one hand, you've got Walnut Creek contamination, which doesn't seem to have gotten much attention, and you've got a South Congress issue from a developmental standpoint, both of which involve social equity issues. And I've been sort of amazed that has less traction in Austin than I thought it would, frankly, coming from the outside. So I have watched this with quite a lot of interest as to how this issue is handled politically here in Austin, and frankly, I'm unimpressed. I think that's, in a way, the heart of the issue you've got here is perhaps a disconnect between how the county sees the world and how the city sees the world, and perhaps how the activists like yourselves that are working on important issues where you're having trouble getting traction is sort of in that space in between.
You're exactly right, Jim. And like I mentioned earlier, just the difference in attitudes politically between the county and the city. And there's just been this mood in Austin for so long that is so pervasive of development equals bad for the environment, and things staying the same, preservation equals good for the environment. And there's been so many times in our city's history where that's proved not to be true. But I think some of our kind of old school politicos in the city just can't get their mind out of that binary, even in a situation like this where it's so clear that this would be a net benefit to the community, to the environment, to the city, to engage in this process.
But I think more generally, the absence of there being camaraderie around this social equity issue was really probably what struck me more. And that's not something that's legally required necessarily. It's just what I would have expected in Austin, and I didn't encounter that.
I mean, to your point, Jim. So like young man in Austin, you can imagine the spaces I hang out in. I would say the thing that I was most shocked is this did not run across my radar. Austin is a very progressive city. It's a very equity-focused city. But because East Austin is, an impoverished community, a separate community, so many things happen out there that simply don't reach the Austin core. I think if people knew what was happening, it would be such a gigantic outrage.
I think that it goes back to what y'all were talking about earlier, this sort of middle landscape that we're talking about. I mean, so much of the environmental focus in Austin has been on the suburban development, on going out into the springs and into the aquifer recharge areas and really important environmental issues out there. And what we're talking about is almost a constituency, an environmental constituency behind development of a certain type. And that's not traditional environmentalism. I think this is the maturing of the environmental movement, and frankly, my criticism of the environmental movement. This isn't a 70s environmental issue anymore. This is a modern environmental dilemma that we have to solve. And I would have thought Austin would have been more advanced than, say, Houston or, Dallas or other places. And I've been surprised at the lack of sophistication about these issues in Austin, which I consider in many respects a very sophisticated community.